Hey, welcome to Woman On. I'm Maxie McCoy, your host, and this season we are talking to the people and the women making 2020 actually somewhat inspiring. Believe it or not, it can be true. And remember, if you love what you're hearing on this episode right now, there's a worksheet that comes with this for free. Go to womanoncollective.com/worksheet. And if you want to go deeper, if you want to meet with me and us and small groups and women to talk about these issues, you can do that every Tuesday and Thursday. Just get your Woman On Collective season pass at womanoncollective.com. All right. My next guest is Jordan Marie Daniel. Jordan is an Indigenous Lakota woman. She's a long distance runner, a Lululemon Global Ambassador, and the founder of Rising Hearts Coalition, an organization aimed at raising awareness of Indigenous issues. This woman is hugely inspiring to me. I think she's going to be inspiring to you too. And just as the real, true epitome of creating change from exactly where you stand. This season, as you know, spans not only Indigenous Peoples Day, but Thanksgiving too. And yet, so many Americans refuse to look at the effects of colonialism in this country happening right now. I remember waking up to these injustices pretty early. For the 1998 Texas State History Fair, I worked on a report about the Trail of Tears and the forced relocation of 60,000 Native Americans between 1830 and 1850 by the United States government. As a kid, that was something that just felt like this wild, distant history. But as an adult, I've learned so much more about the current picture of colonization and its modern day effects. I want you, as an example, to consider these numbers. 4 out of 5 Native women have experienced violence in their lifetime. Murder is the third leading cause of death for Native women, who are murdered at a rate that is 10 times higher than other ethnicities. 10 times higher. Factors contributing to these numbers and exposing Indigenous women to increased violence are our reliance on fossil fuels, pipeline routes cutting through Native-owned land, and the man camps of workers that pop up along with them. In preparing for this interview, I found myself overcome. I don't know how you couldn't be, with the heaviness reading the stories of the murdered and missing Indigenous women that Jordan holds prayer runs for and devotes some of her life's work towards. And through that heaviness, I was also inspired to learn more, to do more. And I think that you're going to be inspired by what you hear in this episode too, to use whatever platform you have to work toward change, to work toward a better future. And we'll do it better together by locking arms so that the issues, the missing voices, the challenges of all marginalized communities can rise up. Here's Jordan Marie Daniel. When you hit that starting line at the Boston Marathon and you have the iconic red handprint across your face and MMIW on your leg, can you tell me what went into that decision, the experiences before that led you to choosing to do that when you walked up to that starting line?
Yeah, it was a series of just a bunch of different events. The last few years, I've become more dedicated and invested in the epidemic of missing and murdered Indigenous women, and participating in prayer vigils, organizing prayer vigils, supporting the organizations, the advocates, and the families that have been impacted, and organizing educational panels. Especially once I began my new journey in LA, I started organizing those sort of panels to have these discussions, especially outside of Indigenous voices and circles, because I felt like all too often these conversations were always being had within our own circles, and rightfully so, because these are our relatives, and this is really having a devastating impact in our communities. And it's been an injustice that has seen no justice and no resolution whatsoever for, I would say, since 1492, since contact. And so what led to that moment of deciding to wear, the red handprint and the letters on my body was just time and time again feeling like no one cared about Native people, Native women, and our children and Two Spirits and our relatives, and feeling like our lives are expendable, especially after having seen what happened in Standing Rock and with the pipeline being relocated from Bismarck to Standing Rock and going through treaty territory, and treaties being, the most supreme law of the land, and every single treaty that has been ever created has been violated and never upheld. And so that sparked this notion of environmental racism exists, especially in marginalized communities and POC, people of color communities. And it just seemed like it was an injustice happening too often with Native people. And so having run the San Diego Half Marathon 2 years in a row in March of 2018 and 2019, I decided to take that opportunity to wear MMIW on my bib number. And I was hoping it would spark conversation, maybe help, garner support, but it sparked a couple conversations, but it got mostly visibility within our own circles, within the community. And while that was great, and while it was intentional, it wasn't having that impact of calling people in and coming to this issue and wanting to do whatever they can to support, the advocates, the families. And so in 2019, about a month later, was the Boston Marathon, and I had the incredible opportunity to go. Wings of America, my friend Dustin Martin, who's the executive director, invited me to help fundraise for the program and to just be a chaperone to the 5 Native youth that were there who were going on a college visit and running in the BAA 5K. So it was really exciting, and I just love Boston. It was so great to be back kind of in my home region where I mostly grew up.
You grew up in Maine, right?
Yeah. And so lots of good memories of just racing and visiting and all of that stuff. So it was really great to be in that atmosphere again.
Why do you think Boston called in a different kind of attention that the choices that you had made, like in San Diego, didn't? What was the difference, do you think?
I really don't know. I mean, definitely the two races are very different. It's Boston Marathon, so you have thousands and thousands of people, and you have so many runners and just participants there for so many different reasons, so many different purposes as to what gives them, that motivation to put one foot in front of the other. And I felt like that was lacking at the other one. It was a smaller half marathon event. It was popular, but, it was nothing compared to Boston. And I think Boston, especially just because of the community and what happened with the bombings in 2016, I think a lot of people there, when they found out why I was wearing red letters and a red handprint and having that understanding, they became a lot of voices that reached out to me and recognizing like, hey, I sat on the bus with you driving to the Hopkinton start line. I wish I had known about this. I wish I could have shaken your hand, or I wish I could have cheered for you if I had known about this. And so, it was that the lack of support and visibility for this movement and for so many of our relatives that have been taken and still missing, that led to me making the decision to want to throw away time and not care about how I performed. Because granted, I only had about a month to train for this, because he asked me like a month and a half before, and I was like, sure, I'll do it. I'll definitely fundraise money for you guys, and I'll just do the best I can. And my partner's, driving me to the start line, and I had no idea really what I was going to do. I knew I wanted the red handprint. I asked for my parents to bring it to me. My mom came up to visit and cheer me on, and it just kind of felt like my hands knew what they were doing when I got the paint out, started just putting the letters on my body, and then he helped me with the red handprint. And it just became all about creating this opportunity for them and not for me, and completely removing myself from kind of the selfishness of the sport of, I want to run fast. I want to place this time. I want to place in the top, whatever. I have to run this pace. And I threw all of that out the window, and it was just all about being intentional and being purposeful with every stride. And I wanted to carry prayers. I wanted to offer prayers and say them out loud. And I had 26 names that I found. One of them was my relative, Brittany Tiger. And I wanted this space to be for them. I wanted them, if they were listening, if they could feel the energy, to know that someone among so many others are thinking about them, that they're not forgotten, and offering prayers to them and offering prayers to their families and to our communities and praying for justice and for healing. And then, it's about a half a mile left maybe of that mile. And I'm like, I'm going to try and enjoy this route and the cheering to keep me going. But it was honestly the easiest, best race of my life. And even after that into the next races, because I dedicated every single race after that for all of 2019, it just got progressively harder. And I think I went into it a little naive and not thinking it would impact me mental health wise.
Yeah, that's what I wanted to know, is when you say that it got harder as you took that same ritual and practice into other races, how did it impact you?
So I ran another race about a month and a half after. It was my first trail race, and that went really well. And I was still kind of recovering from the whirlwind of media attention that they got and our prayer run got. And it was the third race, the Mammoth Half Marathon in June. That's where I started feeling like my body was just going to exhaustion. And I'm not used to going into a race already emotionally and physically depleted. Just having done the research and finding the names, I want to make sure that I'm recognizing the relatives, who have gotten a lot of attention and some action, like Savannah LaFontaine Greywind, and Hannah Harris and Ashley Loring, heavy runner. But I wanted to find the relatives, who were taken decades ago, and their cases are a cold case still and unsolved. I wanted to find the relatives who, just haven't received that support and have received that attention. So it was a lot of researching and a lot of finding groups and just following hashtags to find more relatives and doing a call to action of, hey, if you have a relative that you've lost, like if you would like me to run for them, please let me know, reach out. And I got responses from that. And so it was sitting with that heavy emotion, and having read sometimes what happened to them physically was really hard to sit with. And so I wasn't setting up the boundaries that I should have been, but I didn't know. I've never done this before.
Connecting what you just shared in terms of holding that burden of their stories, the research, their lived experiences and all of that pain. And then also the media frenzy that you just mentioned, coming out of Boston Marathon. What was it like having to hold both of those at once? Did the media frenzy feel like a burden? Was it something that you were excited about, but also, it kind of thrust you in a spotlight of having to carry the torch of those stories? What was that like?
It was really overwhelming. It felt like at first it was okay, the first few requests, but then it just started getting really exhausting because I'm repeating myself a lot of the time. And as it was mentioned with my friend Claire, who wrote the article about me in Trail Runner, she just said one of her things was, one of our last few interviews, her voice kind of got monotone, and it made me reflect on how many times has she had to speak about this. And it's not that I'm getting monotone. It's just I go into autopilot because one, I'm so passionate and I know what I need to say, and I know, I can speak from the heart to this. But it does get exhausting to have to relive this, especially when I'm having to relive kind of the pain that I was going through. And after that race, I broke down. It became insomnia. It became nightmares. It became anxiety attacks and panic attacks, and the constant need to keep running, because I felt like if I wasn't running, I wasn't helping to give visibility. So I ended up running myself into injuries that I've never had in my entire running career of 22 years. And I'm still recovering from that. And I'm still recovering from this, this really big mental health setback, because, it took me a long time until of this year in January to seek out help from a therapist and to take 2 months straight off from running completely, which I've never done in my life. I always have a hard time even taking one day off a month. And so the fact that I did that and didn't miss running at all, I only wanted to get back to running when I had that idea of like, I miss running. And it took 2 months until I felt that.
2 months.
Yeah, it was catching up on sleep. It was setting boundaries and still trying to like hold myself accountable to those boundaries. But at the same time, I'm a community organizer. I'm an advocate, and my platform is bigger than just MMIW. I do a lot of work in advocacy and environmental justice, racial and social, and so the opportunities of speaking and partnering and building campaigns is just very, very big.
A lot.
Yeah, there's a lot there. And so, I'm still figuring it out. I'm still learning what works and what doesn't work. I'm kind of happy that we're in this pandemic moment because it allows me to heal from these injuries and really kind of focus on myself and literally start from zero of running and slowly adding on mileage and just taking care of myself. And I've done some prayer runs this year already. And so I'm kind of playing with the connection I've made the most is when I wear the handprint. The handprint really is just this heavy symbol that represents all of the voices that have been silenced by violence. And I think that is part of the reason why it gets so hard mentally and emotionally and spiritually. And so some prayer runs that I've done, I chose not to wear the handprint, and I still wore the letters, or I didn't at all. And I noticed that I recovered better mentally and spiritually. But on the 360-mile prayer run that I recently did in Utah with 11 other Native runners carrying prayers, there were 2 days that I wore the handprint out of the 5. And those 2 were the heaviest days. And I hadn't worn the handprint at all yet this entire year until that moment. And the first day that I did it, I was maybe 2 miles into it, and my partner was visiting or like checking on me in one of the spots. And I just ran to him and I stopped running, and I just was like panic breathing. And I was, running by everyone that was cheering me on. And I was having this panic breathing again and just feeling the heaviness and like carrying those prayers in my medicine bag with the tobacco. I had the paper with their names on them, and just like clinging on to the sage and the medicines that I had in my hand, and just trying to still offer those prayers. But at the same time, I could just feel all of this emotion just coming up in my chest. And like, I sensed I was holding myself back from crying. And then finally, when I saw my partner, who, I feel comfortable to be vulnerable. And so I literally stopped and just hugged him, and he's like, "Are you okay?" And I just started crying, and I had to like catch my breath again and compose myself and just think about them, and just started running again to finish my leg. And so I'm starting to see like where can I have the most intentional impact and the most prayerful moments that can have the red handprint versus, if I want to be running in prayer all the time, I don't need to wear the handprint because, those prayers are still being sent whether I do have the handprint or not. But yeah, I'm figuring out the boundaries still.
Well, and it's such a beautiful, and thank you for sharing that, what it is like to be doing something so intentional, and your work is devoted to so many things, as you just mentioned, that are so much bigger than you. And you are, putting Indigenous visibility above, what at times was probably your own mental health. And so being able to recalibrate that and come back, I think, in all the work that any individual does, it's having to figure that out and figuring out what ground zero is. As you
Yeah.
took that time off of running and as you're continuing to rebuild in this insane year, those boundaries that you just mentioned, what, the red handprint is clearly one of them. What have others looked like for you in terms of things that you didn't realize were holding you back from your ability to serve your highest good?
Yeah, I think it's just about removing myself from some spaces,
Yeah.
especially like online. I had joined, groups that focused all about MMIW,
Yeah.
and I just removed myself from seeing the notifications. So if I actively want to see like what's the latest update, Savannah's Act just got passed, the Not Invisible Act just got passed, and I'll actively seek those out if I need this information and content to stay updated or to be part of the content that I'm creating online for people to educate themselves on. But it's removing those notifications and seeing new notification, a missing person.
Yeah.
It's removing those. Not that I don't want to like ever see them. I still end up seeing them eventually, but it's kind of being inundated with all of these notifications and comments, being tagged.
Mhm.
Social media, it came down to like, okay, I need to remove, people who I don't know aren't allowed to comment on like any of my posts. And
Yep.
like just creating even just small little boundaries like that, while it makes me feel really sad because my platforms aren't just about me and
Yeah.
my life. It's about having these discussions and being very transparent and honest with my lived experiences. So maybe it resonates with someone else and letting them know that they're not alone. Creating dialogue and talking about these issues that, no one wants to talk about or confront. And so I want my platform to always be interactive and I want to be approachable and reachable. But at the same time, it's like, I can't
So
reply
much.
back to everybody. I'm not trying to be mean or rude. I don't want people thinking that, but it's at the same time, it's just like I can't respond. I can't, answer every single message that's in the request or something like that. It's just there are not enough hours in the day.
There aren't.
And
And
so
your energy just gets so divided when you do that.
exactly.
We had a conversation this season with Bethany Myers, and they were saying, it was a moment when they realized that they didn't have to respond to every single DM in Instagram. And it is every strength casts its shadow. It's like on one hand, we have these platforms that allow you to bring conversations and narratives and topics that have been ignored for hundreds of years.
Yeah.
And at the same time, those are also impacting your day to day and how you're able to show up in your own life.
Hmm.
And so
Exactly.
those small moments, I don't think we realize how big of an impact those moments have. And one thing I was thinking about as you are talking about, the spaces that you're choosing to either be in or not be in. And, kind of what you said at the beginning of this conversation too, about welcoming people who are not traditionally in the conversations around, the violence against Indigenous women and the, racial and climate change connections, in these communities also is, as you step out of your own community and the people who know these narratives, and then you step into communities who don't know them, do you feel the burden of having to constantly educate?
Mhm.
Because that's actually something that I have personally been thinking about just in the questions that you ask. It's not, the burden is not to be on you to come educate us and give us your keynote every time you have a conversation with us. But, how do you choose that balance of where you do show up to educate, but also not feeling like you're having to take that burden on?
Yeah, it's I was just having a conversation about this last Friday. Anytime these issues get brought up, it's always, I'm finding myself getting tagged in these here, you should be talking to this person, or hey Jordan, can you chime in on this conversation to inform this person about this? And
You're like,
It's either
no.
from that. Yeah, exactly. It's either from that, or it can be into the conversations of what diversity, equity, and inclusion looks
Right.
like. And I am part of so many of those conversations. And while I want to be, at the same time, I have yet to ever be in a meeting where I'm not coming from a standpoint of like having to feel like I'm on offense, or
Right.
I guess defense
Yeah.
too.
Right. Yeah.
Always
Oh,
having to
you're
be
playing
like,
all the roles.
yeah.
Yeah.
And like always having to be a voice and always having to speak up. I would love for a diversity, equity, and inclusion training to happen where I don't need to say anything. I can just listen and take it all in and just enjoy it and learn and be supportive. But at the end of the day, it's like it's a lot of it is so taxing. It's emotionally taxing. And this is a conversation that I've had with so many other of my friends coming from the BIPOC to Spirit LGBTQ communities. And so
Yeah.
this is something we're used to. This is something that, I really recommend. I never listen to my own self and my advice, but I always recommend like we need to be paid and compensated for our time and emotional energy, especially for a lot of the content that is created on social media that we're doing on our own time, because we're trying and fighting so hard for social change.
So hard.
And no
Yeah.
one is asking us, no one is reaching out to us. Sometimes they do, but then they kind of take our concept or our information and lived experiences, and they interpret it and put it into their own trainings without ever giving us credit or without ever paying us for our time.
Yeah.
And so they're being very extractive with our own emotions and lived experiences and trauma and healing that we are constantly trying to interweave and do all at the same time. So it's exhausting. And while I love having these conversations, at the same time, I just wish, I feel like we're at a point where like we should be getting this by now.
By
Like
now.
I created a blog several years ago for these discussions,
Yep.
and the fact
And
that
they
I'm
are
still doing
They
it.
are so good. If you're anything like me, you love listening to inspiring stories, but then there always is this little letdown at the end of a show because it's sort of like, well, now what? How do I put anything into action that I've just heard? Well, at Woman On, we're here to solve that. Each episode comes with a free worksheet that you can download to get dirty with all the wisdom and put it in your own life. Just go to womanoncollective.com/worksheet. And one of the things that really stood out to me is the work that you are doing at Rising Hearts. And I know that I just want to acknowledge you are doing so much work on so many dimensions that I don't want to narrow it to just this or just that, but that the work and the education and the personal stories and the lived experiences that you are putting out, and then with Rising Hearts and the community organizing that you're doing, one of the things I was curious from you, because I think that there's so much to take from this, is you were doing that and it was largely in person organizing. You're with people, you were bringing people together around pushing these wildly important issues forward. And then this year we wake up and we can't do so much of the way that we did things. What has this year been like for you in figuring out how to adjust and not repurpose your work, but maybe repurpose the mediums of your work?
I mean, virtual, I love it.
Do you? Yeah.
I
You're like,
think
I don't have to go anywhere.
I know, exactly, especially in a pandemic. I don't have to worry
Mhm.
about getting sick, but
Yeah.
I think virtual has the potential for a greater reach.
Yeah.
A lot of in-person stuff, you can't have people, like if I'm organizing something here in LA, I can't have people from the East Coast be part of it. So I think virtual has a really unique opportunity for having a bigger reach and a bigger impact, and
Yeah.
making it accessible. Well, I mean, you can't assume everyone has, high speed internet or, these applications, but it seems like a lot of people do. And yeah, it makes it, for me, it makes it more comfortable. It makes it more fun. It makes it more safe, because I also know a lot of people coming into these conversations and issues, a lot of people, don't feel safe enough to speak to their own experience, in person, but, being able to speak to their own experience, maybe virtually, while they're in the safety of their own home. They have, whatever they need to do
That
to keep
grounds
them,
them.
that
Yeah.
centers them, I feel like allows for that opportunity. And so I think it's just having a very amazing ripple effect of social impact, having things be virtual.
Jordan, that's such a beautiful insight that I haven't necessarily thought about before, is the way, because I think a lot of times we think of digital spaces, especially when we think of social media, as pretty unsafe,
Mhm.
and especially unsafe for marginalized communities. And as you are creating safe spaces online, and what you just shared, is there anything that you are doing to cultivate that closeness and that intimacy with the community that you're organizing, as you, Jordan?
I mean, so Rising Hearts really began with just bringing visibility and representation for Indigenous voices and bodies in these spaces and on these platforms. And it was born out of the No Dabble Standing Rock movement, because I saw the lack of representation on those platforms at rallies and marches. And it started with me showing up with my sign and having this idea, and my friends supporting me and being my volunteer organizers. And Rising Hearts really has just been so rooted in just grassroots, being all about the people, creating these opportunities to be accessible, and to always have room for expansion and for growth.
Mhm.
And so I'm constantly learning, what can I be doing to make this better, more inclusive, more safe. And as I've been learning, I have seen the true value of what intersectionality is and means, and serving as a member on the Intersectional Environmentalist Council, and
Mm.
having just this better understanding of needing to be there for everybody, needing to be there as a supporter and an ally and a relative to each other and to our movements, and recognizing that, I played a part in it, of just kind of being siloed within my own community. Not that I didn't care, or, not that I didn't like reshare or do anything for other communities that have been impacted by white supremacy and racism
Right.
and systemic oppression, but it hasn't been until, the last year where it's we need to expand out of our own silos, and we need to come together as communities and fight for transformational change together to build an intersectional movement. And it's Rising Hearts is now really focused on being intersectional, as, still doing the work and to support, Indigenous communities, Native country, but also showing up and creating content and doing just a
Mm.
lot more, you know, actions to support all of our communities, and even in the language of what Rising Hearts is and represents, including those other communities and voices as well. And so now, Rising Hearts, is just all about being intersectional and intentional. And it's something that I truly believe in, and something that we've been lacking for years. And
Mhm.
so even with my prayer runs, I've been dedicating prayer runs for Black brothers and sisters who have been murdered, and making sure that the world sees that this injustice, is happening in our communities, and the trauma that we are experiencing for hundreds of years, is all rooted in the very same causes. We're just experiencing them a little bit differently. But it's creating these opportunities with Rising Hearts to bring and call people in, not
Yeah.
just communities of color, not just our Two-Spirit LGBTQ community. It's bringing in allies to see and hear us, and to understand us, to support us, to vote with us in their
Yep.
mind. um, and having these virtual, you know races that I've organized. I'm organizing my fourth one now in the last like 5 months. It's about creating these platforms to have everyone be there together to support, and especially to let people know that, Indian country wants you to understand and to be friends and to support us. And a lot of people have asked, like, oh, is it okay if I sign up for your Indigenous Peoples Day virtual? And it's like, yes, like sign up. It's not
Yeah.
just for Indigenous people. This is for
Yeah.
everybody. So this is about creating content and being able to control the narrative from our perspective, rather than it being created and dictated for us.
Mhm.
And just creating these opportunities for everyone to be part of. And um, that's why I like creating these virtual events, creating these virtual run wellness events. Right now, I'm organizing the Indigenous Wellness Through Movement, and having people participate in any of the 15 sessions that we have for Native American Heritage Month, which is all of November.
Yeah.
And you're doing anything from learning Pilates to yoga to salsa and bachata to daily hip strength and core and
Yes, please.
exercises, everything. It's about expanding this knowledge and this dialogue, and creating a better understanding of who we are, why we do what we do, why we are resilient, why we are so strong, even despite the adversity that we still continue to go through. And just having people learn from us, and learning what decolonizing wellness looks like, especially the issue or topic of wellness being heavily over commercialized
Yeah.
in the last couple of years. And so I want to help build a platform with Indigenous Wellness Through Movement, and having it be monthly, and just offering these sessions for everyone to participate in.
What is it about running and or movement in general that allows it to be this great invitation to other perspectives and histories and work that is, not in the mainstream media?
I think it just is its own expression of, I guess, advocacy when you do make that connection. And I would say I only made that connection last year at the Boston Marathon. I've seen, politics in sport a few times. But for me, it was all about running connected me to my family. It was about being a Native athlete, representing Native athletes and hopefully our next generations of athletes. It was about connecting with the land and my surroundings to Unchi Maka. And it was just my therapy of disconnecting from school or work or the stresses, and just going out for that run and just doing it for myself. But as the years have gone on, and I would say probably in 2016 is when I kind of made that connection of, oh, well, you can definitely run and have a message that you want people to hear. And so that was organizing the Run for Water rally to welcome the Standing Rock youth who ran over 2,000 miles from Cannonball to Washington, D.C. to oppose the Dakota Access Pipeline. And what they did really kind of put me on this path of, you can advocate for something that you truly believe in on any platform and in any space. And so I participated in prayer runs. I participated in these other kinds of actions, but I had never brought it in to the competitive aspect of it. I always kept it separate and kind of compartmentalized the two, because I felt like maybe that would take away maybe my love of running. But like I said, until 2019, it just got to a certain point where it's just like, enough is enough. I can't keep resharing or donating or retweeting or, creating this content that I feel like only Native folks are only seeing because we're the only ones that care about this issue. And so that's where the intersection of sport and advocacy for me really clicked. And after that, and seeing the ripple effect and even the inspiration that it gave to our younger generations, like Rosalie Fish, who, is like my little sister, and she's in her second year of college now. She just texted me today.
Yeah, I wanted to ask you about her because, it's as you're speaking, it's so clear that activism and 2019 really transformed your running, which the reason I love you saying that it wasn't always like that, as growing up a runner, it wasn't always a platform for activism, and then it became one, is it gives so much inspiration to people who have, whether it's a running platform, a writing platform, everyone has their own unique place that they're coming from, and we can layer the good work onto that. And I wanted to ask you about Rosalie Fish. Can you explain to everyone how she got brought into your world and why, and what that relationship has looked like?
Yeah, she reached out to me a couple of weeks after I'd finished the marathon. And it was in one of the requests. So I just one day happened to be checking, and she had messaged me asking like, hey, I saw what you did. I think it's incredible. It's really inspiring. And from seeing in other interviews of how she speaks about me, she just says, it's really nice it's really inspiring to see Native women in sport, in running, take this opportunity to bring attention to something that, all of our families have been impacted either directly or indirectly. And so she had reached out to me telling me that, and asked if she could have my blessing to do the same thing at her state meet, which was a few weeks later. She was a senior in high school, and I responded immediately. I was like, yeah, go for it. Like, this is why, because at this time I'm starting to see all of the impact and the media attention that they're getting, the names they're getting, that their stories are being brought back into the spotlight again. And I always try to remove myself from saying, this is my platform. This is not about me. I'm just a messenger. I'm a prayer carrier. I am just using my own body as a way to to deliver these messages into the names, and to speak their names out loud, and to put them in print, and do whatever I can. And so I told her, yes, go for it, do it. This is exactly like what we need. And she did it, and she elevated running and activism to even a higher platform than what I was doing. And I was just like, this is just an amazing ripple effect that I had no idea was going to happen. And even after finishing that run, I honestly thought, no one's going to care. Like, I'm going to make this post. I'm going to share with all of my relatives in the communities that I work with of, this is who I ran for, and this is why I ran for them. And this is for you guys. This is, continuing this Indigenous presence and representation as a voice and an advocate. And I had honestly no idea that I'd be on the path that I am now.
And an amazing one. And I wonder too, with an example like Rosalie and that ripple effect, and you've obviously created, you call her, like your little sister, and this really strong relationship. What was it like to have somebody in it with you? I imagine, and I don't want to project that it was heavy for her also in the way that it was heavy for you, but did it matter that you had someone kind of arm in arm in the same journey with you?
Definitely. That's something that we both speak to, of we understand it. We know how hard it gets. Even after she had finished, I think it was her second race, she had won, but she was really conflicted at like how disappointed she felt. But at the same time, she didn't know why she was feeling this. And I was like, it's because of the prayers you're carrying. It's because of how heavy this issue is. And you're literally carrying the weight of this epidemic when you're running with you. And you're going to have to just feel it. You're going to have to run through it. You're going to have to keep pushing forward. And we both understand where each other is coming from. We are the only ones that can really understand it. We text each other every once in a while when one of us has a run or one of us is struggling, or we keep hearing or seeing more missing flyers. And it's just like, what can we be doing? Like, what feels like not even this is enough. And like, what else, what action do we need to be taking?
When you guys are talking, how do you answer that question for yourself? Because I think, anyone, no matter what area of work that they're doing and trying to push progress forward for a certain community, for a certain issue, it doesn't ever feel like it's enough. And that is a very relatable sentiment. And I'm curious how you answer it, how the two of you answered it.
I feel like we don't really ever answer it. It's always of kind of reassuring us that we're doing literally the best we can, and we're sharing the resources that should be shared and out there for people to know about, to support, because it's really these organizations, the advocates like Sovereign Bodies Institute, National Indigenous Women's Resource Center, the Urban Indian Health Institute, and like hundreds more of coalitions and groups that are all focused on ending gender-based violence, on protecting Native women, on protecting women and children, on protecting our elders, and domestic violence, sexual assault, human sex trafficking initiatives, and providing safe homes. So there are so many amazing voices and advocates and relatives out there doing this work. And I think when we do speak to this to each other, we're kind of just reassuring ourselves, like, you are doing the best you can, and kind of just giving that extra validation of like, we also can't take on too much.
Yeah.
we're always being spread thin, especially since she's in college. And you know, part of me wishes that I hope you are having a good college experience without needing to take on the weight of the world right now with all of the injustice and civil unrest and inequities that are happening and very visibly present. I want you to be a kid and enjoy yourself. But at the same time, I'm also really inspired by how she's able to manage it, and the coursework she's doing and the training she's going through to be certified as I think she's training to be getting her hours to be kind of like a domestic violence advocate. And so doing that as well as training, you know, she just doing amazing work. And like I said, if I helped to create that ripple effect, she created it too. And it inspired other Native athletes to do the same. Basketball players, football players, volleyball players, you name it. It's
You name it,
literally seeing
it.
we're seeing it everywhere. And so it's just an impact that I never thought was going to happen, but I'm so grateful that it has.
Yeah, it has. And you have been a huge part of that. And we are so grateful for it and inspired by you. And as we wrap up here, I do want to know, you know, who is the woman or person on the rise that the Woman On community should be keeping an eye out on?
Ooh, that's a lot. I could name at least a dozen right now.
I love it. I know this is always the hardest question in every interview because we have 9 million women we want to tell people about.
Yes, exactly. I mean, I would just say, even start with just Rosalie Fish and my best friend, Callie Wolf, Corinne Rice. You know, we have these amazing women and matriarchs in our communities. And even just on the Intersectional Environmentalist Council, you have like, you know, Leah Thomas, Green Girl Leah on there. And you have Andrea Perez, you have Pinar from Queer Quechua. And you just have these amazing voices out there that are just creating such an impact in our communities and having these ripple effects of change that I would love to see them interweave and connect, rather than, like I said, staying siloed and with only in the communities. And sometimes it's not their doing and doing that. It's just sometimes people just don't know about the other kinds of topics and issues that are out there. And that's what I truly believe intersectionality can do, is help increase awareness and to help really inform everybody of what's happening and how is it all interconnected.
It's all interconnected. A woman to that, the more that, you know, all of these issues and amazing voices like yours are brought together, the more that we can push the macro change forward. Last question, Jordan, what are you batshit grateful for today?
Oh, I would just say for my family, for us being here and being able to support each other, even if I'm on the West Coast and they're on the East Coast and in the Midwest. I think it's just about having family right now, especially more than ever, to help keep me centered and be those amazing reminders that I always need every single day when I feel like I'm just stressed out to the max and feeling like I'm not making an impact at all. Because all of the work that we're doing in our communities and on these platforms, you know, it's chiseling away at this much bigger issue. And it's just going to take time. And sometimes I always think about time as the thing holding us back, but I just have to be patient. And it's going to take time, and we are going to see the change that we're all fighting for.
We will, because we have people like you, Jordan. Thank you.
Appreciate you. Thank you so much.
Love what you're hearing? Well, you get to really dive in by joining the 10-week collective, where you'll be put into small groups that meet every week for the entire season, led by one of our brilliant Woman On leaders. They're so brilliant, you're going to love them. We break down the episode themes together every week. We discuss, we learn from each other. It's seriously so fun. And there's some super cozy merch that's exclusive to the collective.
That's the Woman on World. We really hope that you'll join us.